Amid a housing crisis, our team noticed a pattern. Fire after fire in building after building, with one factor in common.
We've been calling the city about the homeless people breaking in.
Firefighters say it's no mystery. It's getting colder, and people on our streets are finding shelter where they can.
When it gets colder, there's an increase in fires associated with abandoned buildings.
At the same time, a dose of hope. The city and county pouring millions of dollars into opening hundreds of shelter beds and bringing mental health services to Portland's downtown core.
This represents a rare opportunity for us to come together, to pool our resources.
But first, it's almost election day, and we're zeroing in on a Washington town with a rep for failing school levies.
The students will suffer the most. There's no doubt about it.
The district, in part, blames misinformation. Voters say school officials have tried this before.
If you cry wolf too many times, then nobody looks out for the wolf.
Here's the story.
Yeah, election night eve, right? It's an interesting story. Stay tuned for it. I'm Maggie Vespa. Welcome to The Story. This is the show where your questions and your comments fuel our content. So all the contact info is at the bottom of your screen right now. Email thestory@kgw.com. Use that hashtag #TheStoryKGW. Our team, as always, is watching for your feedback as we speak. With that said, let's get started. Let's get to that big story, shall we, about a big fight in a small town over school funding. The Battleground Public School District has a levy on the ballot in tomorrow's election. If this levy fails, the district says it'll be forced to cut dozens of positions, leading to larger class sizes. And they say programs like music, art, and theater would go away completely. But opponents of the levy say schools already get enough of their tax dollars and they can't afford to fork over more. Here's Ashley Korslin.
I just try and, post and get people educated, especially
inside the halls of Prairie High School in the Battleground Public School District.
It's really fun to interact with different clubs and other people.
Students Sydney Corden and Ricardo Martin Del Campo are rallying their fellow students to get involved in the upcoming election.
A lot of them ask questions.
Specifically, they're campaigning in favor of the district's replacement levy, which is up for public vote. The 4-year levy would replace the one expiring at the end of this year.
So I think, we're making a really big difference.
So now things are different.
Superintendent Denny Waters says the vote will be pivotal for the district.
It's still one of those things that I wake up at night and the first thing that pops into my head is, how important this is for us.
The replacement levy would bring in a total of $116 million over 4 years, roughly 14% of the district's $200 million operating budget.
Our assistant principals are all part of the levy funding. We have nurses part of the levy funding. We have psychologists part of levy funding.
Vote yes! Woo!
If this sounds familiar to voters, it's because it is. This is actually the second attempt at a replacement levy this year. Voters failed the first one last February by a margin of 1,000 votes. Waters says if the second bid fails, the district would have to cut more than $28 million in programs and staff next year, impacting things like school psychologists, music, art, and some athletic programs.
We're already at a lean place in terms of our staffing. And the idea of cutting back even more is really scary.
This dilemma is not new for Battleground. Since 1980, the district has experienced 17 levy failures, including 3 double levy failures, the most recent in 2006. A double levy failure in the early 80s forced the elimination of middle school sports.
I think there is some uniqueness about it for us. I don't think that, Vancouver or Evergreen has experienced double levy failures.
So why are school levies such a contentious issue in the county's third largest school district?
I think there's no simple answer. I think it's complex. There's a lot of layers to it.
It comes down to sometimes ideology.
Curtis Krebar, president of the Teachers Union, says politics play a role.
You have sometimes kind of polar opposites on that.
And so does misinformation, like social media claims that the district teaches the controversial critical race theory curriculum in schools.
In the Battleground Public School District, we are not teaching critical race theory.
Then there's the debate over the state's comprehensive sex education program, which has been a hot topic in the Battleground School District.
We're not in the business of indoctrinating people into one ideal or anything else like that. We're here to get them the opportunity to kind of think and to be able to listen so they can make good decisions in that way.
I actually wrote a blog article.
For others,
I'm concerned about affordability and what we're getting for our money.
Like Richard Rylander, a retired educator with grandchildren in Battleground Public Schools, the levy vote is financial.
You've got people on fixed incomes, a lot of them in North County, because they're just concerned that they're going to get taxed out of their homes.
Battleground has seen immense growth and property values are skyrocketing.
Is it fair to tax people based on what they may ultimately get to sell the property for in the future?
And without a large foundation of corporations and businesses in the area as a tax base, Rylander says residents shoulder most of the burden, and many simply can't afford it.
But the increases in all of those taxes are, I think, exceeding most people's income increases. And so what do you do?
Which brings us to the cost of the replacement levy up for vote. The expiring levy has a rate of $2.32 per $1,000 in assessed property value. The proposed replacement has a lower rate of $1.99 per $1,000 in assessed value. So for a home valued at $450,000, you'd be looking at paying between $900 and $1,000 a year over the course of 4 years. In Washington, schools get the majority of property tax revenue, roughly 56%, according to a report from the Department of Revenue. That's made up of money from local and state education levies. In Clark County, the Camas, La Center, and Washougal school districts have the highest school tax rates. Battleground has the lowest.
Name is Terry Dotson.
That's what Terry Dotson hopes voters will keep in mind on Election Day.
We have over 500 lawn signs out in the entire district.
His group, Battleground Citizens for Better Schools, has handed out thousands of flyers to spread the word.
I'm not an educator, but I'm passionate about taking care of the kids.
I was involved in track and basketball.
Kids like Sydney and Ricardo,
Band, drama, choir,
who worry their favorite activities would go away if this levy fails.
I couldn't ask for better friends who are in those programs.
Their biggest message: get involved, get educated, and vote.
Tell everybody you know, hey, the levy's coming up November 2nd. Do your part and vote.
Okay, interesting debate. Ashley Korslund joining me now. So you and I were talking, one of the reasons that you wanted to do this story was there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion out there about this levy, and we just wanted people to know the facts about it going into tomorrow.
Yeah, and get informed, know exactly where your tax dollars are going. But Maggie, I think the prime example in this story, in this community, are those claims about critical race theory, which, to be clear, critical race theory is not being taught in any public school system in Oregon or Washington. But you can really see how claims like this, they get spread on social media and on Facebook, people share it, and those claims are really being used to sway how people vote, especially something like this with a high dollar levy.
Yeah, it was brought up multiple times to you, so we know that those issues are central to the debate right now. Also, a lot of people you talked to who have differing views about the levy told you that they all feel like they've been the target of online harassment, even possibly threats. I mean, that's just kind of how emotional and intense everything has become around this.
Yeah, we all know it. There's a lot of vitriol out there, especially when it comes to social media. But yeah, people we spoke to who are either in support of this levy or maybe oppose it for a variety of reasons. We heard from some it's financial. Any of them who try to talk about their points online, even to try to maybe educate other people, they do feel like they have been targeted. They've been harassed, and it's a bummer to see that when you see something like a school levy getting extremely political and hateful.
Yeah, as I said earlier, this is like the land of hyperbole. Everybody is just so intense about this. But again, we just wanted people to be educated about it. So Election Day is tomorrow. Do your best to educate yourself, and we will see what happens, of course. Ashley Korslund, thank you.
Thank you.
So staying with tomorrow's election, let's talk now about another big measure in Clark County. This one would fund body cameras for sheriff's deputies. And we've been covering this debate for a while. In the past year, Clark County deputies shot and killed 2 black men. Kevin Peterson Jr. on the left was killed during a drug bust, and Genoa Donald was killed in a traffic stop. Both shootings were ruled justified by prosecutors, but they still prompted calls for body cameras, including from the county prosecuting attorney and from the sheriff himself. Now, last April, Clark County councilors signed off on a plan to put 150 body cameras on deputies as well as on the dashboards of their patrol cars, but the only issue was figuring out how to pay for it. So that's where this ballot measure comes in. If approved, Proposition 10 would create a new sales tax to pay for these cameras. It would add an extra 0.1% to whatever you buy. And if you need help with that math, because we did, that's 1 cent for every $10 you spend. The tax would last 10 years and fund the program, we're told, for 30 years. And by the way, it's worth noting, Vancouver is already planning to launch its own body camera program for the city's police next year. That would be separate from the sheriff's deputies programs. And in the meantime, you might have heard the Portland City Council is expected to take up funding for body cameras when they debate their budget this month. I'll keep you posted on that one. That's still tonight, staying with this one. Let's take a look at some ballot measures here in Oregon. First up, another Greater Idaho vote, this time in Harney County. You probably remember a group called Move Oregon's Border has been trying to do exactly that, move Oregon's border to form a new state called Greater Idaho. And this is what the proposed map would look like. This is their proposal. So far, 7 Oregon counties have voted in favor of their county commissioners, basically discussing possibly voting on the idea. Tomorrow, Harney County will decide whether to join in and follow suit. It's worth noting, though, even if voters approve this, if they vote in favor, it's not likely that Oregon's border is going to change anytime soon. To actually make that happen, it would first require approval from the Oregon State Legislature and then from Congress. Good luck with that, of course. Next up, some other local measures on the coast. People who live in Cannon Beach and Newport will vote on what's called a prepared food tax in restaurants. It would add an extra 5% to your bill. That money would go to fund police, fire departments, and libraries. Meantime, voters in Lincoln County will decide whether to ban short-term vacation rentals like Airbnb and Vrbo. If approved, they would phase those out over 5 years. And we do want to stress this would only apply to unincorporated Lincoln County. It would not apply to the bigger towns like Newport or Lincoln City. Remember, you have to get your ballot in by 8 p.m. tomorrow night. It is too late to mail it in Oregon. It's too late for that. So you'll need to take it to an official drop box if you haven't already. Starting next year, it's worth noting, ballots postmarked on Election Day will count, which is already the way it is in Washington.
We've noticed a pattern amid Portland's housing crisis. Firefighters say buildings are burning as people struggle to find shelter. Those sleeping on our streets say that's not shocking.
There is a lot of fire stupidity.
But first, city and county officials announce a nearly $40 million plan promising hope for Portland's homeless. When the story continues.
Welcome back to The Story. Here comes our plug. Keep sending in those questions and those comments to thestory@kgw.com or use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter. We are always checking your messages during this show. Case in point, I want to get to an email from Teresa. She wrote, quote, "As a taxpayer, I am seriously wondering what my tax money is being used for exactly." She wrote, "I'm also curious about why my tax money is not cleaning up the endless garbage strewn about the city. There is trash almost everywhere you look." Teresa, thank you so much for writing in. Actually, we kind of have an answer for you tonight because the city and the county just announced a huge plan to use an extra $38 million in tax revenue to clean up our city and try and address our housing crisis in a real, tangible way. So here's Mike Benner with tonight's focus on solutions.
We didn't get here overnight. The houseless crisis has been chipping away at the city's soul for over a decade.
Portland City Commissioner Dan Ryan, surrounded by other city and county leaders, announces a $38 million investment in our community's homeless.
Today, there's zero denial about the impact of this crisis on our street is having on our city.
We're told the millions of dollars in extra tax revenue will fund a number of things. Up to 400 new shelter beds at 4 new leased or purchased sites. More behavioral and public health services in high-impact areas like Old Town Chinatown, and up to 24 additional positions focused on outreach.
The trauma that our neighbors experience every day, surviving outside, doesn't end when we deride it, close our eyes to it, or put it out of view. It ends when those experiencing it are connected to the places, the services, and the relationships that get them closer to the stability that they need to find safety, rest, and ultimately a home.
County and city leaders tell us about 1/5 of the $38 million will go towards trash pickup and campsite cleanup.
Anyone who's traveled Portland streets knows that our city is overwhelmed by unsanctioned encampments that often pose health and safety and environmental risks to those who not only live within them, but also to those businesses and neighborhoods that live immediately adjacent.
Mayor Ted Wheeler is referring to Old Town Chinatown, a neighborhood he says helped shape this new plan of attack, one that gives Commissioner Ryan the most hope he's had since taking office more than a year ago.
We must continue to innovate, work smarter, and this is definitely a step in the right direction.
Calling houselessness a humanitarian disaster, Mayor Ted Wheeler is also pleading with Congress for help. He says America's cities cannot do this alone, and they need a federally funded plan. Reporting in downtown Portland, I'm Mike Benner for KGW News.
So now that we've talked about solutions, let's walk through one example of just how dire this crisis has gotten on Portland streets. You saw a lot of it there, but let's drill down. This used to be a warehouse. Now it's a charred hole in the ground with furniture and building materials piled in. That lot is at Southeast 9th and Alder. And you might remember the fire that reduced that warehouse to rubble. It happened about a month ago, and you could see smoke in the city for days. Now, officially, the fire department has not said how this fire started. They're still investigating. But, and this is what caught our eye, firefighters made note to reporters that day that this place often served as a, quote, unsanctioned homeless shelter. People had been living in that abandoned warehouse, and it had a history. Take a listen.
This particular fire did have transient people coming in and out of it. It had a history of that. Our department had been to this building prior to the actual greater alarm fire. Just weeks before we were on a fire in this building. It was determined quite a while ago that this is an unsafe building, was an unsafe building. This building in particular had issues with holes in the floor, stairwells.
Now, thankfully, no one was hurt in that fire. And again, fire inspectors are still investigating the official cause. But here's the deal. That was just one in a string of fires lately tied, firefighters believe, to our housing crisis. In fact, around that same time that the warehouse burned, our newsroom got an alert about this. An apartment building at Southeast 21st and Powell also caught fire. That one, firefighters say, started inside a tent in the camp right next to that building, and then it spread to the apartment building. Thankfully, everyone got out okay. And then just last weekend, another house nearby was totally destroyed. This was at Southeast 28th and Powell. 85 firefighters battled that fire. Again, thankfully, no one was hurt. Neighbors, though, flagged down our crew on that scene and told them their theory: squatters.
It was just horrible. The whole thing is, a lot of people, just not me, we've been calling the city for years about this building, about the possible damage with fire, about the homeless people breaking in.
Now, at this point, we do want to be clear. People seeking shelter, people seeking warmth, people seeking protection in abandoned buildings is tragic. Pretty much everyone we talked to agrees that people on our streets need help, even if they say they don't want it, which experts will often tell you is the addiction talking or the mental health struggle talking. That being said, this is not sustainable. It's not safe. for anyone. But we wanted context behind the headlines and behind these flashy videos. So I asked Portland Fire for some statistics on how often this happens, and they just sent it to us. In the last year, 40 structure fires in Portland have been traced back to houseless people camping in or next to those buildings. 40, up from 16 the year prior. So these fires have more than doubled. We also know tent fires are up. Earlier this year, we reported those have risen 130% since before the pandemic. And firefighters say they're doing everything they can to try and mitigate this. They go out and they talk to people living on the streets. They work with groups like Street Roots who go and visit the camps and educate people on fire safety. And no one knows the importance of that more than Portland's homeless themselves. In fact, while we were back out at that warehouse site last week, Shantos McDonald stopped to ask me what we were doing. He lives in a tent nearby, and he remembers watching that building burn.
There is a lot of fire stupidity. You know, I've seen a lot of it. For some reason, there's a person that likes to just melt all the porta potties that are available to them, which I find just painfully stupid. But there's also, you know, I saw a guy, you know, burn up. There's a lot of burnt cars too. A lot of people, their cars are burning. Like, I don't know if they're, you know, just keeping it on for heat and then something goes, or they're, you know, I've seen people repairing their cars and all of a sudden explosions happen too. But there's been a lot of, you know, cars burning up also. So, and there are people that, you know, they'll just burn anything.
We appreciate him talking to us. So, you know, given those last two stories, please, seriously, let us know. Do you think officials are doing enough to address this crisis, especially given the funding package that Mike talked about in that story prior? Email thestory@kgw.com or use that hashtag thestoryKGW. Let's lighten things up a little bit. When we come back, a trip into the KGW vault marking a special anniversary for Soccer City, USA. When the story continues. Welcome back, and hey, happy birthday, by the way, to Providence Park. Our soccer stadium, get this, 95 years old last month. She looks beautiful. It's actually the oldest soccer-specific stadium in the league, soccer-specific. And we know now it's home to the Thorns and the Timbers, but over the years, Providence Park has had a lot of different names and a lot of different uses. So in honor of her birthday, let's dive into the KGW vault and take a look.
One of the highlights of every year's events in Portland is the Rose Festival, and this year's celebration was bigger than ever, climaxing weeks of preparation. Then came the night of June 11th at Multnomah Stadium with the coronation of Ruth Parrott of Grant High.
This was back in 1958 when Providence Park was called Multnomah Stadium, and Rose Festival events were held there. The site started as Multnomah Field way back in 1893, built by the Multnomah Athletic Club. It officially opened as a stadium in 1926, at the time called the Multnomah Civic Stadium. It was later bought by the city of Portland, and it hosted the Portland Beavers minor league baseball team, as well as college football games, dog racing, concerts, and speakers like evangelist Billy Graham. Then in 1975, the Portland Timbers played their first game at the stadium against the Seattle Sounders.
Another Cinderella story in sports was and is the Portland Timbers. In their first season, they went all the way to the league championship game. They lost that game to Tampa Bay. Avid Portland fans rallied behind the Timbers and proved their loyalty in the attendance figures. Over 20,000 per game during their first year.
See that? Portland's always been strong supporting the Timbers. Along the way, the stadium has been renovated several times, the latest just 2 years ago. It is incredible. The city sold the naming rights, by the way, and the field became PGE Park, Jeldwin Field, and finally, Providence Park. If you have any ideas for the KGW Vault, send them our way. The story at kgw.com is that email. We're going to finish the story right after this. This is one of my favorite things about Mondays. We get to kick off a new Hey Help campaign. This week, we are asking you to consider donating to Discover Your Northwest to help them repair the recent vandalism at Coldwater Lake Recreation Area at Mount St. Helens. Last month, toilets in the restrooms were smashed and sinks were damaged, as you can see. To donate, just hold your phone's camera up to this QR code. It'll take you to the donation page. You can also go to kgw.com/heyhelp. And by the way, this is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how small. And of course, pick up that phone. You probably are already holding it. Who are we kidding? And follow us on Twitter at TheStoryKGW. And of course, you can always email thestory@kgw.com. That does it for us. Let's bring in Laurel Porter for the news at 6:30. Hey, Laurel.
Hey, Maggie, thank you. We're following up on a heartbreaking case of domestic violence from Vancouver and taking a look at how the problem has gotten worse during the pandemic. The news at 6:30 starts now.
This is KGW News.